Right. Just realized it's only going to let 10 people play at a time, so I'm going to go ahead and upgrade my Kahoot account. That's not going to work. Okay. All right. Okay, so it's 9. We'll go ahead and get started in a sec. I'm going to go ahead and take attendance real quick. And then we're going to start today with a Kahoot, which I can just go ahead and get it rolling now. Go ahead and screen share it for my Zoom folks. All right, and it should bring up a pin for y'all to be able to log in. So you can either do it by going to kahoot.it, or if you have the Kahoot app, you can use that as well. Gonna drag this to the side so I can take attendance. And so people on Zoom, you can also join. Just follow this link. You can either do it on your phone or have it open in another tab or something like that. All right, so folks who might have joined the Zoom a little late, what we're doing is a Kahoot. So please go ahead and go to kahoot.it. Or you can go on the Kahoot app with your phone. I'll scoot this over so you can see there's also a QR code, although it doesn't always work from projectors. So I'll give it just another minute for folks to get a chance to sign on. So again, Kahoot.it or with the Kahoot app. And then this is your game pin, 781-3375. And this activity will ask you to do some diagnosing. You get to be the psychologist. So we're going to talk about some people's symptoms and then figure out what disorder they might have. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and get started, but people can still join. If you're still in the process of joining, you should still be able to. All right, so it's going to bring up a description. Zelda is extremely concerned with cleanliness. In fact, before she retires at night, she goes through a cleaning ritual of her clothes and body that lasts up to 2 hours. If she misses a step or performs it imperfectly, she starts the ritual all over again. All righty. All right, and most people selected correctly. Zelda has OCD. All righty. And right now it's just who answered the fastest, basically. All right, next one. So Luke has been worried something bad is going to happen. He can't pinpoint the source of this feeling, but he's jumpy, irritable, can't sleep, and can't concentrate. Alrighty, so Luke has GAD. So he's not having full-on panic attacks. He's just worrying all the time. That's that constant worry, that thinking. All right, we're changing up a little bit here. Okay, now we're going to see what disorder Juan Carlos has. He was in a car accident, seriously injured. His father was permanently paralyzed. 5 years later, he has trouble sleeping because of nightmares. And he starts thinking about the accident, almost reliving it in his mind. He can't bring himself to go to the street where the accident happened, as it makes him too nervous. All righty. Yes, so everybody got that was PTSD. That one was pretty obvious, I think. Generalized anxiety disorder. Alrighty, next one. We're gonna look at Terry. Terry complains that he's experiencing recurrent episodes of lightheadedness, rapid breathing, and dizziness every time he tries to leave his house. So he's leaving his house less and less frequently. He now only goes to the grocery store in the company of his sister, and he checks immediately for the exits and windows. Yeah, so this one was a little trickier. This one is agoraphobia because he was specifically worried about leaving his house. If he was worried about people judging him, then there would be social anxiety. All right, switching up. Miriam has a streak. Nicely done. All right, what disorder does Dora have? So Dora begins having trouble breathing. Her heart starts pounding. She feels weak and dizzy. She feels like she's having a heart attack and is really afraid she's going to die, but she's not really having a heart attack. Panic disorder. Everybody got that one. Yep. So all those symptoms of a panic attack were what she was experiencing. All righty. All right, so next we're gonna look at Jada. Jada's father died 2 years ago, but she can't seem to move forward. She's having a hard time sleeping and concentrating. She lost 15 pounds because she barely has an appetite. And last week she was crying in the bathroom. Alrighty, yeah, so most people got this one, major depressive disorder. So, you know, as long as she's having these symptoms at least 2 weeks, then that's what this is. And we don't have any evidence of a manic episode, but if we did, then bipolar disorder might be spot on. All right, just a couple more here. Oh, we got some switching up on the leaderboard. All right, so now we're gonna look at Terrence. For the past 4 years, Terrence has felt down nearly every day. He goes to work week after week, barely able to concentrate. He thinks to himself, I'm a loser. Yep, most people got this one. It was a little trickier. So this is persistent depressive disorder, what used to be called dysthymia. Yeah, sorry, I had like a moment of like, is that what it used to be called? So this is where you like have a low-grade depression for a really long time and it just doesn't go away. So that's what he's experiencing. Ooh, more switching up. I like it. All right, last one. All right, so Diamante felt so low and unhappy, he didn't leave his room for 6 weeks. 2 months later, he had so much energy, he stays up all night, going for days without sleep. He decided he'll be the next president of the US. He was recently banned from Kroger because he got into it with a store clerk. When he talks, his friends can barely keep up. Yeah, so folks are right on the money here. So this could be bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. Really, we would need a time criteria. So I would say, honestly, either of those could be correct in terms of the mania. Excellent. All right, so let's look at our podium. So Abby came in 3rd via Zoom. And then Sarah P. And then very dramatically, Miriam. Great job, y'all. I don't have like prizes other than getting your your little shout out here. But hopefully that was kind of fun for y'all and a nice way to kind of review some of the stuff we've been covering. And what I plan to do for Wednesday is to do another one of those, but for the personality disorders, which we'll start talking about today, but I don't think we'll get all the way through. So that's okay. This disorders will kind of blend into the therapy. They go together anyway, right? So it'll work out. But we were talking about schizophrenia on Friday. And in particular, we had left off at the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Let me go ahead and put on the bigger captions here. There we go. And so the negative symptoms of schizophrenia can actually look like depression. And they're not as dramatic as the positive symptoms, but they're actually usually the symptoms that are more incapacitating and interfere with people's lives more. Because in the long run, they can rob people of essentially basic human attributes. So one of these is affective or emotional flattening. So they will just have a reduction in how they react emotionally, or sometimes they just don't react emotionally to things at all. So schizophrenics, people with schizophrenia may appear to be emotionally blunted, or they might have a really short range of affect. So whereas like when we're really excited, right, we might jump up and down and squeal and all that kind of stuff. These folks might actually like a smile is as far as they get when they're really excited. They may also display affect that's inappropriate to the situation. So for example, they might giggle during someone telling them that someone died. And it's not that they're trying to like make the other person feel bad. It's just something is going on in their brain that doesn't let their emotions express the way they want to. Alogia is minimal or absent verbal communication. Some people with very severe schizophrenia are essentially entirely mute, even though they are physically capable of producing speech. But often it's they only give short, blunted responses to questions. Thought blocking is when someone will like open their mouth and try to talk, like you see their mouth moving, but in fact, nothing comes out. Avolition is reduced or absent motivation. So many people with schizophrenia find it difficult to complete even simple tasks like making the bed or going for a walk. It just feels overwhelming. They may just sit all day and show little interest in planned or goal-directed activities. And then a word we're familiar with from talking about depression, anhedonia. It's a sense of loss of pleasure. So they just don't enjoy the things they used to. Other important diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia is, we mentioned this in passing on Friday, the temporal criteria. You've got to have symptoms for at least 6 months to be diagnosed. And then significant impairment and or deterioration in functioning. And this is their ability to function in his, her, or their, let's just use their social or occupational environment. So people with schizophrenia often have significant work and relationship difficulties. And 60 to 70% of them never marry. If they do marry, they have really high rates of divorce, unfortunately. Another indicator of their inability to function was the word I was trying to think of last Friday, which is downward drift. So the socioeconomic status of individuals with schizophrenia is usually below that of their family of origin and their unaffected siblings. So typically kids do better economically or about the same as their parents. With people with schizophrenia, it's the opposite. So they call that downward drift, that they're sort of drifting downward economically because the disorder interferes with their ability to participate in the work world. Give you all a quick story about that. So one of the few people I saw with schizophrenia, she had hallucinations and delusions that the Russian mob was following her. And she had her very first, what we would call psychotic break, like very active psychotic symptoms while she was at work. She was an art teacher. And she believed helicopters were circling the building coming to get her, and there were no helicopters. So again, this is a woman who, you know, was established in a career she loved, living independently, everything you would expect for someone in their 30s, right? And when I saw her, I think like a year or two after this first psychotic break, she was moved back in with her parents. She couldn't work. She didn't even feel like making art, which is huge for someone who loves art, right? And was just so like the negative symptoms were really what was indicative of her right then. All right, so I have a video. We probably won't watch this whole thing, but this is a video of CNN's Anderson Cooper undergoing a simulation to see what it's like to have schizophrenia. So they had him put in headphones and then had voices talk to him. So you'll hear what he's hearing and see him try to cope with it.
So I'm going to put these earphones in and they're going to try to do a series of tests. Okay, so I'm now hearing sort of whispers and voices in my head, and the first test is on some number puzzles.
Listen, you suck and they know it. Can't you get this right?
Okay, so I did this test for 3 minutes and I did not get a single one. It's very hard to, concentrate when, if it's like music or something constant, it's easy, but people talking to you is very difficult. So now I'm going to be asked a series of questions by our producer, Susan, and these are basically a series of questions that a person would be asked if they were being admitted to a hospital.
Can you tell me what day it is?
Yeah, it's Sunday, June, I don't know, what's the date, 7th?
So I'm going to say 5 numbers, and I want you to repeat them back to me after I'm done.
Okay.
5, 23, 67, 2, 76.
5, 23, 67, something 76.
I'm going to say 5 words. You don't have to repeat them, but just listen to them. Cat, book, cigar, damage, and rain.
Make you okay.
Can you name the last 4 presidents of the United States?
Okay for you to be
Barack
here.
Obama, George Bush,
Here. Here. Right here.
Bill Clinton, and George Bush.
Hear it?
And again,
So
for those of you who might not be familiar with Anderson Cooper, he often is reporting on political things. So the fact that he had to like kind of pause there, right, tells you this is really interfering. I'm going to try to skip ahead. There's a part where they have him walk on the street and you see what it would be like to sort of navigate the world with active auditory hallucinations.
Just come clear. Come near to me. Come near for help.
Hey, do you have yesterday's paper? Yesterday's New York Times? No? Okay, I'll just get today's. It's incredibly distracting on the street to have somebody talk in your head, and it makes you feel completely isolated from everyone else around you, and you don't want to engage in conversation with other people. You kind of find yourself wanting to engage in conversation with the voice in your head because they're constantly being really negative and talking to you, and everything they're saying relates to things that you're actually doing. They're criticizing things you're doing. It's like it's like you have a chorus watching you and commenting on what you're doing, and you can't help it. I mean, I literally find myself wanting to kind of respond to them, kind of tell them to be quiet, and it's incredibly unpleasant. This is a very, very unpleasant experiment. It's really, I mean, it's eye-opening because it kind of really shows you what other people must be going through who deal with this on a regular basis. But also, like, I cannot wait to take these headphones off because it's really depressing. It's very.
So yeah, I mean, you can see again, he did it for a few minutes, right? And it was just maybe like an hour, and it was overwhelming. So I'm trying to imagine what it's like to live with schizophrenia every day, and that's your lived experience. It's completely overwhelming to think about, right? All right, so the next form of severe psychopathology we're going to talk about is dissociative identity disorder, which is what used to be called multiple personality disorder. And I do have to say that some people who have this disorder still prefer the old term, but diagnostically we use DID. So at any given time, this is a person who has two or more distinct personalities. Subpersonalities, sometimes they're called alters, like alternate personalities. And each subpersonality or alter has a unique set of memories, behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. There are recorded instances of people with hundreds of subpersonalities. The modal number, the number that occurs most often, is 2. So sort of a main personality and one that's split off. If you think about Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Not to sound like ignorant, but how do you know if someone like actually has this, or if they're kind of like exaggerating like imagination?
Legit question. And I should say, for like full transparency, there are well-known, respected psychologists who do not believe this disorder exists for that reason. So it's really, you got to parse it out. You got to really try to question them. But, you know, some people can be really motivated or just truly believe they have this happening. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen or heard of the book or the movie Sybil. It was a very famous case of a woman with multiple personalities. And a book came out maybe 10 years ago called Exposing Sybil. And it was about how, unfortunately, Sybil probably kind of made her disorder up to the point that she probably believed it. But it was like she was seeing this therapist that had a really good therapeutic relationship. And then the therapist told Sybil, I'm only going to work with people with multiple personalities now. And then all of a sudden, Sybil came in with multiple personalities. So yeah, it can be really tricky. So I had 3 different supervisors I really respected, very professional, who each had 20+ year clinical careers. And each of them said in that amount of time, they'd seen 1 case of this. So I think it happens. I think it's super, super rare. Basically, so it's a matter of parsing it out. Another problem is people who are very like vulnerable to suggestion. they might have this with like a couple personalities, but like if you hypnotize them and then like suggest there might be more personalities, they might like sort of create them. And again, not even consciously, right? So yeah, it is something that you have to be very careful with diagnostically, because obviously you don't want to diagnose someone with this if they don't have it, but you also don't want to miss it. So yeah, it's a really good question, and one that's actually controversial in psychology still. Yeah, so just honestly, my biggest advice, if you are ever a clinician and you get one of these cases, is try to find someone who's an expert and refer that person. Because again, like normal day-to-day clinicians see them so infrequently that it's really hard to diagnose accurately. Like I had a client who claimed she had it. I was very skeptical because she had a whole host of other things going on. But we would have to like videotape our sessions and watch them with our supervisors. And my supervisor said, oh, she just said we when she was referring to herself. And like, that's actually a good indicator she might really have it. Oftentimes people will refer to all of their personalities as systems. They're a system, and some of them are cooperative and some of them can't really communicate. So yeah, really good question. Very controversial. And we've seen whenever a movie comes out, it'd be really interesting to see if this happened after Split, for example. Whenever a movie comes out about DID, there's usually an uptick in cases, and then it's unclear whether like people just recognize what they have and they never had a name for it, or if they're like, ooh, I want to have that, you know what I mean? So yeah, that gets tricky too. And we never want to just discount someone's experience, but we also want to make sure we're accurately diagnosing them. Yeah, and so at any one time, for the people who do have it, one of the subpersonalities dominates the person's functioning. And usually one is the primary or host personality, and that one appears more often than the others. And the transition from one alter to the other is called switching, and it's usually pretty sudden and dramatic. It can be like just blinking, it can be a cough. So it can just be you sort of watch them and it's almost like their whole facial expression and demeanor morphs. It is also a pretty old disorder. It was first reported 3 centuries ago, which again kind of lends credence to the fact that this is probably a thing, just a rare thing. So you've got to have this disruption of identity characterized by 2 or more distinct personality states, or by an experience of possession. You have gaps in the recall of everyday events, important personal information, and or traumatic events beyond ordinary forgetting. So I think I have a slide on this kind of talking about how the alters interact, but some people will be aware of everything that happens when any personality is out, but some people, it's like when one personality is out, the other personality has no idea what happened. So they'll just sort of like wake up and be like, oh my gosh, what happened for the last 24 hours or whatever. Distress or impairment, and then making sure it's not just a substance use issue or things along those lines. So some stats here. It's often first diagnosed in late adolescent or early adulthood, but generally the symptoms begin much, much earlier. And almost all people with this disorder have histories of horrible, unspeakable childhoods or other early traumas. And the idea is that that DID basically gives people a way to cope with that extreme trauma, that like a alter will break off and the alter will remember the traumatic event, but the main personality won't. So it's like the alter is protecting the main personality. Typical onset is before the age of 5, so really young. And we see women get the diagnosis more often than men, but unfortunately we know that women are more often the victims of abuse, especially the type of abuse like sexual abuse. But certainly men unfortunately can experience that as well as people of any gender. So how do these subpersonalities interact? So there are 3 kinds of relationship. So one is mutually amnesic, And this is the most common, where the subpersonalities just have no awareness of each other. And so for this reason, it can take a while for the person to get diagnosed, because like they just have lost time. They just like, maybe they're having a brain issue or something, right? Mutually cognizant means that each alter is aware of all the other alters. Then there's one-way amnesic, where, actually, sorry, this is the most common, where there might be one or a couple personalities that are aware of the others, but not every alter is aware of the fact that A, there even exist other alters, but B, the presence of each of the other alters. And often you have these co-conscious subpersonalities who are aware, but they're just like quiet observers. They're not like stepping in and interfere. The subpersonalities can differ in really dramatic ways. So vital statistics. They may differ in terms of age, sex, race, and family history. So there is a psychologist, I'm going to blank on his name, that's okay, who like he actually got his psychology degree after he got his diagnosis of DID. And he had child alters, and when he was still like figuring out what was going on with him, they would like come out sometimes when he was driving, and like a 6-year-old alter doesn't know how to drive, right? So that always was very, very scary. The movie Psycho, spoiler for a movie created in the 60s. Norman Bates is the main character, and he has a subpersonality that is his deceased mother. Yeah.
So, like, say someone has like 2 or more personalities, and like, they came to class and like got all the information in, and then like switched after class. Would the one who like wasn't in class like not know about class?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's another famous case that a movie was made about called Three Faces of Eve. And that's one of the things one of her alters says is like, I made her do all the work. I made her do all the school thing. I just, kind of went to the back then. So yeah, in theory, they could have different knowledge. There are examples rather of people who can like do different things, like playing an instrument. So like one alter could play it, the other one can't, but that alter is the one who trained in it, speaking different languages. The other thing that's really interesting is physiological responses. So some subpersonalities may have differences in physiology, like different blood pressure levels and different allergies. I mean, that's the one that boggles my mind, right? It's like, how does that work? So in Three Faces of Eve, for example, so they call them like Eve White, Eve Black, and then there's a third personality named Jane. And when Eve Black comes out, she immediately, like, Eve White wears these like knee-high stockings, and she immediately takes them off because she's allergic to nylon. And like, I don't understand how that works. Like, that's the part that boggles my mind as a psychologist, is how can your physiology be different?
Yeah, like the brain is confusing enough so you get it. Like you understand, kind of like not understand, but then I don't get how like the body would change.
Yeah, and that's the only thing I could think of is exactly what you just said, is that it's actually the brain, right? It's like, because I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience, like maybe as a kid where like someone in your class had lice, and then you like immediately start itching your head, right? Even though you don't have it. I think it might be something like that, right? Where like the brain kind of convinces you. Yeah, exactly. And the blood pressure, dual blood pressure can be affected by a lot of psychological things. So for example, meditating or doing like relaxation techniques can make your blood pressure stabilize. So it could be, again, the brain kind of is doing that.
I wonder if it is like the brain kind of like tricks them into thinking they have that allergy. If they like went to the hospital and said I'm having an allergic reaction,
like if it would be the same. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Not, or if they are.
Yeah, I mean, because you can have physiological symptoms even if you don't have DID. Like, so there's, for example, there's a very rare disorder someone can get called pseudocyesis, where like you are convinced you're pregnant and you'll actually like gain weight, your period will stop. Yeah, and your breasts will become tender and all that stuff. but you're not, right? And like your brain is just doing all that. So I'm wondering if like they might even have the physiological responses. Again, mind blowing to me. There's so much we don't know about the brain still. This is an example that I really like. This is someone's different alters and how you can see even their handwriting is different. It changes slants. You know, we've got Johnny 7, I believe that was an alter that was 7 years old, right? Writing in very careful cursive, things along those lines. And then this is a clip of a woman who is a mother and has 20 personalities.
Anytime the personalities come out, I'm afraid that I may never come back again.
With help from Kim Noble's therapist, Kim's alternate personalities come out one by one. First, dominant personality, Patricia, disappears, and Bonnie takes over. Bonnie used to be the main personality who took care of daughter Amy.
Hello. Nice to see you. It's a long time to see. I know. Because, yeah, it's nice to see her.
Amy doesn't get to see Bonnie very much anymore. In the early years, the constant threat of having her daughter taken away by social services sent Bonnie into seclusion.
When Bonnie disappeared, I think I was about 7 or 8.
It got very stressful with social services were putting a lot of pressure on us, so I just couldn't take any more. And I just cracked up over it all, and that was it. I want her to just be happy and have a good life. That's it. I just pray that we don't affect her. But
So there you can see that she's saying we to refer to herself.
I think we have so far. I miss you so much.
Knowing it's time for Bonnie to leave, she bursts into tears because she doesn't know when she will see her daughter again.
We can wait a minute.
A little while later, Ken emerges. He's 21 years old, homosexual, and doesn't acknowledge he is one of many personalities.
Hi, Ken. I'm Kirsten.
Ken thinks I'm one of his friend's daughters.
And why do you see a therapist?
People got problems with me being gay, so I see a therapist.
Who has a problem with that?
The outside world.
Do you date?
I haven't for a long time, but yeah, I've had some nice boyfriends.
When you look in the mirror, who do you see?
Me.
But
who do you
you're
see?
A man. When I look at you, I see a woman.
I'm not transvestite. This is strange. Yeah, I'm gay, but I'm not a transvestite.
Okay.
I don't dress up in girls' clothes. Got no boobs.
One of Kim's more tortured personalities is agitated when she comes out.
Evil. Evil.
Her name is Salome.
Hi, Salome. I'm Kirsten.
She's really evil.
Salome is a personality who rants and raves. She doesn't sit down. She's always walking around the room and not settled.
Salome is deeply religious and seems quite angry.
She was a good Catholic woman. An evil daughter.
What happened, Salome, to the good Catholic woman?
She died. She got killed. She died. That's it. I've got to go now. Bye.
After Salome leaves, things get much calmer when the personality Dawn arrives. She's literally frozen in time and believes it's 1997, the year Amy was born.
Hi, Dawn. Nice to meet you.
Dawn doesn't realize Amy is her daughter. Dawn thinks she had a baby named Sky, who was taken away at birth.
Can you tell me about Sky?
Sky is my baby. And social services just took her away and put her up for adoption. And I can't have her back.
And so who is sitting next to you?
And she's a friend's a daughter. I mean, I think her name is good, and I'm very fond of her.
So again, like, imagine you're sitting next to your mom, and then at least two of the personalities you've seen, right? It's like, this is not my daughter. It must be really, really hard for her daughter. Scroll, like, bringing out another personality. So that's a good question. Some of them can, some of them can't. And even the ones who can, sometimes, like, certain personalities come out when they don't want them to, if that makes sense. So like, she's been in therapy for a long time, and they're probably asking her to switch to show it on camera. But you know, some people can't at all. And again, that's one of the things therapy helps with. And there's an old therapeutic technique that some people probably still use, that tries to like condense all the personalities and back into one. So if anyone, again, spoiler for like a 20-year-old movie, if anyone's ever seen the movie Identity with John Cusack, that is like, it's like a murder mystery. They're in a hotel, people keep dying. And it's actually that, like, those are all his alters, and it's taking place in his mind, and they're integrating the personalities. And that's one of the reasons why that technique isn't used as frequently now, because people feel like parts of themselves are dying, right? And that's not a great sense.
Anytime the personalities come out.
All right, so now we're going to start talking about personality disorders. And like I said, we only have like 10 minutes left today, so we'll talk a little more about these on Wednesday as well. All right, so a personality disorder in the DSM is basically an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of an individual's culture. So I want y'all to notice that this circles back around to what we talked about at the very beginning of this lecture in terms of like, what is pathological, what is abnormal. It's often marked by your particular culture and its expectations. And you have to have at least 2 of these areas affected. So cognition, so your ability to think, concentrate, affectivity, how you express your emotions, whether you feel emotions, interpersonal functioning. So are you able to socialize? Are you able to interact? And impulsive control. So in some of these disorders, people have no impulse control and we're just going to do whatever. The pattern is inflexible and pervasive across a broad range of situations. So it's not just like at school, you get really annoyed, so you're not a fun person to be around, right? It's every situation you're in. It's stable and long lasting. It can be traced back to at least adolescence or early adulthood and significant distress or impairment. One important note with personality disorders before we dive into the descriptions of individual disorders is that you cannot diagnose someone with this until they're 18. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but primary, which you'll see as we go through, some of these symptoms are just things that like teenagers experience as their hormones go crazy. And we certainly don't want to pathologize anybody who's just like going through normal developments, right? But certainly if it becomes clear you've got like a 17-year-old and you're like, oh, they're gonna be able to be diagnosed with this disorder in 6 months when they turn 18, you can mark in your records that they show like traits of this disorder. So there are 3 different clusters of personality disorders, and cluster A are the odd or eccentric personality disorders. So there are 3 here: paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorder. And people with these disorders display behaviors similar to, but not as extensive as, people with schizophrenia. So behaviors include extreme suspiciousness, social withdrawal, and peculiar ways of thinking and perceiving things. And that can leave the person feeling really isolated because other people don't understand them, so don't want to be around them. Some clinicians do believe that these disorders are actually related to schizophrenia, and therefore will refer to them as schizophrenia spectrum disorders. And I actually believe schizotypal personality disorder in the DSM is listed both in the personality disorders category and in the schizophrenia and related disorders category. Clinicians have learned much about the symptoms of these disorders, but unfortunately, very little about treatment. Partially and mostly because people with this disorder or these disorders rarely seek treatment. They essentially either don't feel they need it or distrust authority, and so don't seek that out. All right, so the first is paranoid personality disorder. This is characterized by a deep suspicion or mistrust of others. And although that distrust is inaccurate, it's not delusional. So it's not like the CIA is coming after me. It's just like, I don't trust anyone in my life. As a result of their mistrust, people with this disorder often avoid relationships. It's not even like they're in relationships and they're unhappy. They just like to be like, I don't trust people enough to like get close to them. They exhibit argumentativeness, which disturbs, infuriates, and alienates others. They insist on control and have a sensitivity to power. And if they are in a relationship, they experience pathological jealousy. Other symptoms include hypersensitivity, vigilance, and a lot of caution when dealing with other people. And there's an old movie that probably none of you have seen, but maybe some of you have, called Dr. Strangelove. And there is this character in it called General Ripper. And he is really worried about the fluoridation of the water. So adding fluoride to the water, like for some reason he thinks that that's like mind control. And he might be an example. There's also some evidence to suggest that Stalin had this disorder as well, which, you know, is great for someone who's a dictator to be paranoid about things. Schizoid personality disorder is characterized by persistent avoidance of social relationships and limited emotional expression. Withdrawn and reclusive, people with this disorder are not interested in relationships with other people. People with this disorder mainly focus on themselves and are often seen as flat and cold. So I don't have like a famous person, but I have a little case study here of someone with this disorder. They were unemployed, spent a lot of time alone in their room. They were called a square peg in a round hole, and said must have been switched at birth at the hospital by their family. And believed he was half a person, and then if he didn't go to church, he was doomed to purgatory. But he would slip right in as the service started and leave right before it ended, so he didn't have to talk to people. Schizotypal PD is characterized by a range of interpersonal problems, odd or even bizarre ways of thinking and perceiving, and behavioral eccentricities. These may include ideas of reference, so the idea that like the newscaster is talking to you, or bodily illusions. There's a lot of paranoia and suspiciousness. They perceive others as deceitful and hostile, and their social anxiety emerges from that paranoia. And they have odd beliefs in magical thinking. So for example, they may believe others can read their minds. They might also experience what are called illusions. So these are just short of hallucinations. So for example, they may think they see stuff in patterns that's on the wallpaper that's moving. They have some disorganized speech, like folks with schizophrenia. So they might be tangential, start talking about one thing, quickly transition into something else that's highly unrelated. They can also be vague. It's difficult to determine exactly what the person is talking about because it's so global and abstract rather. And they might also over elaborate, where they just describe every detail of something. People with this disorder often have great difficulty keeping their attention focused. And conversation is typically digressive and vague. They're socially withdrawn, and they typically have few friends. The case example here is Robert De Niro's character in the movie Taxi Driver, which if you haven't seen that movie, most people know the famous scene where he stands in front of the mirror and he's like, are you talking to me? You talking to me? Must be, I'm the only one here, right? And so that's, again, not to the point of schizophrenia, right? But kind of on that spectrum. Okay, we will talk about the cluster B on Wednesday. And then we'll probably start diving into therapy as well.